Woe unto those who give short measure, those who, when they are to receive their due from people, demand that it be given in full, but when they have to measure or weigh whatever they owe to others, give less than what is due. The Quran, chapter 83, verses 1 through 3.
SAFIA scanned the groceries as they moved along the conveyor belt, her shift 2 hours from ending. She daydreamed as she did it, looking at each item, but not really seeing them, until one item that she scanned didn't beep. The customer, an older man who was a regular, looked at the register screen, wondering what was the matter. SAFIA tried again. No beep. She turned the item over and wiped it with a cloth and scanned again. No beep. She looked at the label. The item code number was illegible, and the price was missing. "That was the last package of ground chuck, but I think it's on sale," the man said. SAFIA huffed a bit, not at the man, but at the banality of the routine. She pressed the intercom button and leaned toward the microphone at the register. "Chantel, we need a price check on ground chuck." SAFIA turned to the man. "Do you remember how many pounds this is?" The man pulled out a sheet from a notepad. My wife just told me to get 1 pack. I never converted the packs to pounds." The man looked quizzically at SAFIA. "Have you tried this ground chuck? I hope it's the right kind. Let's just say she always voices her complaints if I don't get every honey-do item perfect." Chantel came by and looked everything over and provided the right pricing. But as she did so, SAFIA zoned out, thinking about the man's words. Voices her complaints. Voices. Ground chuck. Chuck. Converted packs to pounds. Converted. Chuck. Voices. "Chantel, could you take over for me for a few minutes?" SAFIA asked. "Okay, girl, go handle your business," Chantel replied. SAFIA scurried straight to the break room, rifled through her purse. She pulled out Agent Dunn's card. She dialed. He picked up on the first ring. "Agent Dunn, I'm taking a leap of faith here. Can we talk again? In person?"
My heavy eyelids opened only halfway. Images were blurred, but I noticed shoes on my feet. They weren't mine, but they fit. Shiny black. My senses dull. Sounds out of reach. Vacuous pinged my ears. I sat upright. I was in a vehicle of some kind. Vibrations from some distant engine source pulsated under my seat. I touched my knees and looked down through the blur at dark slacks. I ran my fingers on a fine white button-down dress shirt and a tie that was loose. I opened my eyes further, scoped up and around, and recognized it was the interior of a private jet. Fighting drowsiness, I groaned, shaking off fatigue. Then a tap on my shoulder snapped me to attention. "Jabbari," George EKOI said, smiling. I opened my eyes fully, remembering that the last time I saw him in person, I believed he was dead, before seeing him lionized on Nigerian TV news. "You are amongst the living," he said. Heat rose in my chest. I knew George must have been part of what had happened to the Kurmis. I thought about the last scene I saw on those monitors. Hadi and Abdullah being shot, and Hidayah kidnapped. Now me. The anger welled up and steamed to my head. The fog cleared in my mind and my vision for a moment. "You bastard." Now, Jabbari," George responded as he sat down in the plush seat at my right. I saw no other passengers in the plane. "Now is not the time for insults," he said. "I understand your anger, but I'm the reason your head is attached to your body right now." Why, George? I asked. How could you do me like this? What are you involved with? This is not you, George. Jabbari, you think you know me because we were roommates at MIT? I'm sorry the situation has evolved the way it has, but maybe you only thought you knew me. George tensed his face, furrowing his brow as if he wanted to say much more, but he held back. What do you mean, thought I knew you? I said. You learn everything about someone when you live with them. I was in that world, but not of that world, Jabbari. I was not like you. You were in your element, rising and successful, someone everyone loved. What? In my element? I scoffed. MIT was like an alien planet, man. It was only the numbers that saved me. The math, the problem sets. I don't know where you get off. I came to MIT with nothing but brains and faith. You had everything handed to you. George looked at me, tightening his lips. You know, some of us always joke that you were truly a Nigerian prince, like undercover. You never had any trouble paying your tuition. But even so, what's that got to do with what you're involved with here? George looked reflective. Then he turned stern. Do you even know me? I mean, do you know where I came from? My family? Yeah, your dad's a rich man. He used to call our dorm room, but it was never him directly. It was like your butler or somebody dialing the line asking for you first. Maybe so. But the EKOI came from very simple beginnings. George leaned forward, speaking to me close. Let me tell you something, Jabbari. We are not from the big tribes in Nigeria, not Igbo, not Hausa, not Yoruba. My father, Peter EKOI, as a boy used to shine the shoes of the British administrators in Lagos before independence. He was a smart boy, but could not afford to go to university in the 1950s. You know how he made his wealth? He had no real opportunity, but he was smart. Yeah? He was one of the wayo tricksters. He would write letters to Americans, convincing them of financial opportunities. Most letters were ignored, but the conversion rate was enough to fill his coffers, and it lifted him from poverty. You're not serious, I said. Your dad was one of the original Nigerian princes? Yes, George responded. What you all now know as the 419 scam, from Section 419 of the British Colonial Criminal Code for fraud. Before there was email, it was snail mail. It was his start. And my father, Mr. Peter EKOI, he never let us forget it. He always said, if the Americans were stupid enough to fall for those schemes, they don't deserve their funds. It is survival of the fittest. My father turned those earnings into expanding the 419 operation out of Nigeria. We were respected in our country, but not outside. In the UK, when my father tried to expand into legitimate business deals, they amounted to nothing. He could not go beyond the ceiling of underground Nigeria. There was no opportunity to truly compete like it was for you in America, by your bootstraps and your meritocracy. And I saw the struggle with my own eyes. I am the youngest. All of my siblings, they tried to do things differently, legally. They tried. Every one of them tried and failed and had to resort to some version of the family business, except for one. My last brother before me, he studied in Oxford, got his law degree, but then he decided he would not come back to Nigeria. He became an anti-corruption lawyer in the UK. He shunned us all, saying he would not compromise and be a part of the dirty wealth we had attained. I was studying for my O-levels at the time. Today, he does not even see us. When we travel to London, he won't talk to us. He says he would lose his license to practice law in the UK. When I got accepted to MIT, it was under one condition that I could attend. My father made it clear. I could never turn my back on my family. Never. George's passion throbbed, almost like part of the plane. He continued. I tell you, no matter how smart or intelligent you are in Nigeria, the only money there worth having is it is unclean. Thinking you will remain incorruptible is a lie you tell yourself. He told me never to believe in that dream of yours, that American pipe dream he called it. He would say, it is only a way to keep the rest of us from gaining what is ours. It is only keeping them on top. George stared past me blankly. And that's why you lured me here, George? I was almost killed twice so far. Ah, Jabbari, you don't see that this is not what is happening. There are many ways to look at this tragic situation. Don't judge me. I have laid no hands on you directly. There are forces that wanted to get you out of the way when it was clear that you were a hurdle to their aims. I was still woozy, but I could tell George was still guarding his words, telling me much, but revealing little. Aims? But why? Why do the Kurmi family like this? What happened to Hidayah? And what did you have to do with Abdullah and Hadi getting murdered? George sighed. Jabbari, they are casualties of the synchronicity of our affair. They were not targets, but you brought them within the orbit of a titanic clash. What happened to them is what every Nigerian knows as the cost of doing business in our world. If that girl is cooperative, she will be fine. She has advantages that will keep her from the typical abuse of trafficking. She is the one they don't want to sell. They want to harness her knowledge. Perhaps there is a way she will be fine, just as perhaps if you follow my advice, there is a way you will be fine. My headspace was clearing of its fuzziness. I could sense the what of my surroundings, but still not the why. Where is this plane headed? We are going to Singapore, George said. There will be some very important meetings. And you, my friend, will be center stage. You and your Mansa protocol. What? I feigned ignorance. No, Jabbari, George clapped back, stern again. Don't even pretend it has nothing to do with you. We know it is no coincidence that your escape to Kano coincided with the emergence of this new digital currency. The funny thing is, I know you thought you were helping those around you. You did not realize what forces you were unleashing by your little cryptocurrency experiment. George grabbed a computer bag and opened up a laptop. He slid it close so I could see the screen with a login bar underneath a Central Bank of Nigeria logo. He typed, opened up a browser window, started scrolling, selected a file, clicked. A spreadsheet opened up. The title of the file read, Real Gross Domestic Product. A graph appeared, which he selected, expanding and making it interactive. There were several lines plotted, running left to right, jagged and downward. The horizontal x-axis was a timeline, the past year segmented in quarters. The vertical y-axis was money value in millions of naira. The lines of different colors were labeled in the graph, representing different types of economic production: agriculture, construction, services, trade. They started at different heights but were all dropping downward, starting from one point in time along the x-axis. There was one exception. The oil production line trended upward. The other levels of production of the Nigerian economy were first pretty flat and then fell dramatically around the time the central bank announced the compromise of the Nigerian payment system months ago. The non-oil lines showed a steady decline that continued until the present. I had looked at GDP stats for years. This was not a surprise. It showed an impotent economy, in turmoil, relying only on one sector. The lack of confidence in the Naira and Nigerian banks made business difficult, except for crude oil, which was cheaper than ever for international buyers. George silently observed me studying the graph, but he nodded, recognizing my understanding of the data. Then my eyes widened. The worksheet had another tab, labeled RZQ currency. George registered my discovery. Go ahead, he said, pointing to me to click through with my own hands. I pulled the keyboard toward me, opened up the other tab, and another graph popped up. There were also colored lines plotted, but they mostly pointed upward. The horizontal x-axis also showed a timeline running across, demarcated by quarters. The vertical y-axis showed the value of the RZQ currency. I looked at the data, studying the story it told. There was nothing plotted until a few months earlier, the time corresponding with when I first deployed the Mansa protocol. From there, the graph had points plotting different categories of economic activity: manufacturing, education, agriculture, construction, charity, all showing upward slopes as the days and weeks moved to the right of the timeline. It hit me. Of course. The Mansa Protocol tagged every RZQ transaction with a category of spending. This data was easily viewable in the protocol's public data feed, although it didn't include people's identities. The CBN must have been tracking the transactions and studying them. But the graph showed me something else. Over time, RZQ transactions were growing in various economic areas. Economic activity was expanding, denominated in RZQ, while the economic activity in the Naira was languishing. People were using RZQ tokens as a medium of exchange. What was also intriguing was the charity line. As it increased, the other categories tracked up with it. Or maybe the other spending was driving the charitable flows. I couldn't tell offhand, but they were intertwined. What the graphs didn't capture, though, was the reward, the AJR, the Ajr. The gamification was certainly at play in the background, connecting with the flow of RZQ and incentivizing how people spent their digital tokens, but it wasn't captured in their records. I scrolled down on the screen to view the other graphs. The first one on the page was labeled Nigeria Aggregate. Below it were graphs for every state in the country. The northern states had the most economic activity and risk. The other states showed activity later, in keeping with how the Mansa Protocol spread by word of mouth, first amongst the youth, then small merchants, and eventually the economic center of Lagos. Even Abuja was showing use. I thought about the trade rep from Taiwan. The past few months, economic activity was happening in Nigeria, but it was happening through the Mansa Protocol. I turned my head and looked at George, who was staring at me. He raised his eyebrows. "This is not a little thing," he said, sliding the laptop to himself and shutting it. He then pulled a fresh pink Financial Times out of the laptop bag, spread out the newspaper, and turned a few pages in. The banking section. He placed it in front of me and pointed to a headline. "SWIFT to convene emergency meeting in Singapore. New vulnerability in payment systems suspected." Anyone who is anyone in global banking will be meeting in Singapore. My partners will be there and they want to talk to you about your protocol. Partners? You're not talking about Chambers Group International. You mean your goons running the Nigerian financial scene? They have their hands in SWIFT? SWIFT, I thought. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. The private organization based in Brussels that provides the technology that facilitates most of the world's international banking wire transfers. It was an electronic messaging system that all global banks were connected to. If the digital sabotage that affected local Nigerian banks' domestic payment systems had also spread to SWIFT, it would spell disaster for the global payment system. George perceived what I was thinking. My partners in this are bigger than the Chambers Group. This is bigger than Nigeria, bigger than Europe. My partners are at a higher level. A ruffling sound emanated from the back of the plane. George leaned closer to me as if wanting to share a secret. So let me tell you while I have just a few minutes. The others want to control what you have because it threatens them. But I do not care about that. My arrangement with them is only a series of short-term agreements based on the expediencies of common interest. You are alive because I am only seeking one thing. What is that? I asked. Respect for my father. George, that sounds a little extra. Do you think you're the only one out of sorts with family members? Remember my brother and sister back in Detroit? Not all the Lincolns walk the same path. That is my point. You were as ashamed of them as my next eldest brother is of me. George paused, his eyes contemplating as he shifted gears. He then pulled out his phone, unlocked the keypad. I watched, and the screen opened up to a video. It buffered, and then started streaming. It showed the inside of a palm fiddling in front of the camera. The hand pulled up and away. The screen showed the inside of a car from the view of the dashboard. I peered closer. SAFIA's face appeared on the screen. My mouth opened. My face widened. George urged me to look closely. I leaned in more. SAFIA was driving. I could only see the inside of the car, but not where she was. "This is live," George said. He tapped the phone and audio came on. It was the mundane sound of a car in traffic. "What was that address again?" SAFIA said, wondering aloud. Her hands went again toward the camera. She pressed buttons. The phone mounted on the dashboard, perhaps. "She does not know we are watching," George said as I steamed. "This is just a sample. We have her data in real time." What do you mean?" I asked. Before I could yell an expletive, a hefty flush sounded from the back. A door opened into the aisle behind us. It was Inspector Nassim Oyo, stepping from the lavatory, cane in hand. He limped close.
Mr. Jabbari, you are awake. I'm sure you have many questions."
"Yeah, my first one is, how long were you in that bathroom? Sheesh." The inspector puffed his lips and sucked his teeth, shrugging off my remark. He turned to George.
"I assume you have briefed him on the opportunity he now has?"
Oyo asked.
"I was just about to get to that,"
George said.
"I can take it from here, EKOI."
Oyo motioned George to move aside, sitting down in the seat across from me. Oyo, as curmudgeonly as when I first met him at the CBN, looked at me with contempt. He obviously had the upper hand here, but his hate felt personal. George watched in silence, interlacing his fingers on his lap as Oyo took control.
"So, the recent events should have shown you that there are big forces at play here, and you have some choices to make."
I shook my head and rolled my eyes, knowing whatever else was going to come out of his mouth would be bull.
"Mr. Jabbari, you are in a great position. We have learned much about your background, your rise from college until today."
He glanced at George, who looked up at me intently.
"I have known many men like you. I have seen them rise, the brilliant ones. But you see, the world is not so kind to men of exceptional talents. They are the ones who have the most to lose, and when they fall, their decline is not like they fall off the mountain, but like the mountain has fallen on their chest. You have been trying to climb for your whole life. Your family pushed you. You came from the roughest environment, no? They wanted you to rise, to excel, so that your rise would lift them up. But when it came to lifting your people with you, your family, you could not help them. But you helped yourself, okay? Why?"
I stared at Oyo and said nothing. His cadence slowed and became deliberate.
"And then, when you were at the top of your game, the ones you worked for, they threw you away as if you were nothing but some rubbish. I say I've seen your type before. And I know that what you want at the end of the day is to be given the honor that you deserve for your brilliance."
Oyo's attitude shift from contempt to complimenting was thin as a wedding veil. It was asset recruitment 101, trying to tap my motivation, stroking my sense of being wronged, my victimization, to turn me into his agent. This blatant technique was covered in the most basic counterintelligence training. It was the type of stuff presented in your orientation week at the agency, when we would go over the popular cases of intel officers who spied and betrayed the United States. There were honey traps like Sharon Scranage, the CIA clerk stationed in Ghana who fell in love with a quote-unquote handsome and debonair man that turned out to be a Ghanaian intelligence operative. He got the 29-year-old Scranage to share classified information, including the names of Ghanaians working for the CIA. But most inside espionage was usually motivated by mice, either money, ideology, compromise, or ego. Oyo was pressing my ego button. He spoke a shade of truth, but his facade was see-through. "Cut the crap," I told him. If you think I'm gonna help you, you must have flushed your brain in that lavatory as well.
Ah, Mr. Jabbari, this is not coercion. I am simply laying out the facts. You are not a prisoner here. You are a free actor. The time where your elimination was preferred is over. I just want you to understand the reality you're in. You will be placed into that reality as soon as we land in Singapore. There is someone you have an opportunity to meet. Do you remember the name Harold Smith?
I reached into my mental recall files, grabbing the only faint image attached to that name. It was written in digital letters on a screen, a registration document. Harold Smith, I pondered aloud. The image solidified. The guy in the incorporation files for Firewater Technologies, that company receiving funds from the Nigerian banking sabotage, he was listed as the company director for the firm registered in the British Virgin Islands.
Ah, yes, good memory, Oyo answered. You know, at the CBN, when you drilled down to such detail behind the sabotage, I was very impressed. It was one of the reasons why you were to be eliminated.
And so what's different now? I asked.
The difference is the Mansa Protocol. This invention of yours, and we do know it is yours, has become quite the economic reviver. We think it could help our aims.
The Mansa Protocol isn't mine, I said. It's an open source protocol. No one owns it, like no one owns the internet.
Maybe so, Oyo said. But some people benefit from the internet more than others. The people at Firewater Technologies are going to benefit from it, and they think you will be interested in how.
Yeah, but that Firewater obviously is a front company. And if I'm as free as you say, why would I meet with any of these folks? As soon as we get off this plane, I'm heading straight to the U.S. Embassy. Oyo smiled. I looked at George, who kept stoic. Oyo then motioned to George to hand him another newspaper. George reached into his bag and pulled out a Washington Post. He gave it to Oyo. Oyo passed it to me.
Turn to page A12, bottom right corner.
I scanned and found a small article. The headline read, Rogue CIA officer suspected of instigating Nigerian banking crisis. It read, a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council told reporters that the administration is working on improving relations with oil-rich Nigeria and that the rift of the past year was due to the actions of a CIA officer. The officer acting on his own is suspected to have sabotaged the Nigerian financial payment system. The officer, whose name has not been released, was reportedly disgruntled over pay and apparently fled after he was placed on administrative leave by his superiors.
So you see, Mr. Jabbari, Oyo continued, I don't think the U.S. Embassy is going to be very receptive to you right now.
I shook my head. This is some BS. I thought to myself, some journalist was being fed half-truths, but it made for good copy.
It's written there in black and white, Oyo said. It does not matter if the news is fake. Your media loves a scandal. The people love a scandal. The insinuation makes you guilty until proven innocent.
Oyo got up from his seat. I felt the plane descending. He took a few steps into the narrow aisle, stretched himself, then walked back closer to my seat. He leaned over, then looked out my window. We were in the clouds.
As I said, you are a free actor. You can go to the embassy and see what they think about your credibility, returning after so many months in hiding, bringing more questions than answers. Or you can go to this meeting. Meet Mr. Harold Smith. Listen to him and his plans for the Mansa Protocol and the Long Naira together. It is not a coincidence that he is in Singapore during the same time as the SWIFT meetings. There is a problem with the SWIFT system.
The inspector smiled. He beamed as if self-assured.
And if I have learned one thing about you, Mr. Jabbari, it is that when placed in front of a problem to solve, a financial one no less, you won't walk away.
Yeah, maybe, but I don't have to go to the embassy, I said. I also don't have to walk into your hall of shenanigans, Oyo.
Of course.
Oyo rubbed his chin slowly.
The choice is yours, but let me make sure you have all the facts at your disposal. George, open up the laptop.
George followed his command, retrieved the same computer with the CBN logo. He typed in his password, clicked, and swiped. Then he turned the screen to face me. It was a video box. At the bottom, the words live stream. He clicked. The video activated. It buffered. Then an image appeared. It was aerial footage. Green trees came into view below. The camera hovered from a drone's vantage point. I squinted, trying to make out the location. The trees got closer until the drone descended underneath a forested canopy. It stabilized near the top of the trees, then careened through the foliage until a clearing appeared. Tents of green canvas were assembled in a pentagon formation. The camera focused on the tent located at the pentagon's top point. Its flap opened. Out stepped General Rashid al-Saif. He did not seem retired. He wore military gear. A Kalashnikov was strapped to his side. He clutched a gray backpack over his opposite shoulder. He walked across to one of the other tents. There was no audio, but he was speaking sternly, ordering something. There was movement in the tent. Out stepped Hidayah. No emotion marked her face, but she didn't look physically harmed, just stiff. General Saif pointed her past her tent, motioning her to move. She turned around and walked in the ordered direction. He followed, several steps behind her, hand tight on his AK. They made their way away from the clearing and into the bush, tracing worn walking trails through the trees. The drone hovered higher, and I could see the trails linked to another clearing 100 yards away. Hidayah and the general walked, making their way out of the trees into an area of flowered plants sprouting up from the earth in linear formation. They looked like the hibiscus I saw the Kermes using for their sorrel drink. Then into the camera view came about a dozen or so girls, teenagers, dressed in a variety of worn clothes, holding baskets filled with uprooted hibiscus plants. The general shouted something and the girls scurried to a spot in the clearing. There stood a set of makeshift tables and chairs. They dropped the baskets onto one of the tables. Hidayah turned to Saif and stretched out her palm. The general removed a gas mask from his backpack and a lab coat. He handed them to Hidayah. Then he gave her gloves. She put on all of it, walked towards the table, sat down, and opened up a large rectangular tub container which was underneath. The general began backing away, as did the other girls. From the container, Hidayah took out an array of bottles, flasks, dishes, and other utensils. She flipped on a small flame on a Bunsen burner. She took one of the baskets of hibiscus and cut the stems and began placing the flowers in a dish. She worked mechanically, as if she was on the clock. Then, looking from afar, Saif seemed satisfied. He turned around and walked back to the trail. Hidayah operated intently, but even through the video, she exuded that same strong spirit I had gotten to know for those months in Kano. She was diligent, but internally defiant. The drone stayed hovering above her. I could see no one else in the frame. Then, with her hands busy mixing some concoction, her eyes peered from side to side as if prepping for something. Moments later, she stopped and stood up from the table and made a beeline out of the clearing, running away from the tent camp. She sped, and as she ran, the drone followed, above the trees, but tracking her as her form flashed beneath. She ran for only a good 30 seconds when a hand stuck out from behind a tree and grabbed her coat, pulling her to the ground. It was a young man with a dazed look on his face, a Lucky Time boy. He held a machete. He wagged his finger in front of his face and said something. He pointed his machete back toward the clearing. Hidayah pulled herself up, dusted off her clothes, turned around and walked back. The boy said something else and smiled. He followed her, but only up to a point until he stopped and leaned against a tree. Her attempted escape was no surprise. Routine, probably. Inspector Oyo closed the video window.
The young Mrs. Kumi is accounted for, Oyo said. As you can see, she has not been harmed. And if you choose wisely, you can help to ensure that.
I didn't know exactly what he was getting at. What was the quid pro quo? But he was flexing, acting as though he could influence Hidaya's situation. But he didn't stop there.
I have more that may interest you.
He opened up a different window on his laptop. It was a browser shaded in red. The letters at the top spelled out NFCID, Nigeria Financial Crime Investigation Division. He scrolled through a menu, too quickly for me to read the words. He clicked on one item and a new browser window popped up. It displayed sprawling data streams divided into smaller windows. I looked closer and noticed what looked like bank transactions, phone records, a list of website logins and passwords, car rental records, email messages, even GRE test scores. On top of each data stream was the name SAFIA Lincoln. The date spanned from that week back to years before. George clicked on something and another video opened up of photos. He swiped through and showed me family photos and selfies, all from her phone. Photos I recognized and some from my absence in what looked like to be her parents' neighborhood in North Carolina.
We not only have your wife's digital footprint, we can follow her digital feet, Oyo said. We call it the mystique worm. Whatever she does connected to the internet ends up right here. And this data is powerful, oh. Do you know what we could do with this?
He was holding a digital knife to my wife's virtual throat, and I knew it.
Just watch,
George said, pressing a few more buttons, and the screen changed to a recording. The date and timestamp showed a few days earlier. Suddenly, Sophia's face appeared at the bottom of the camera view. In the background, a sign read, Pine Street Credit Union ATM. Open. The sound of wind and traffic came from the speaker. Sophia pressed digits on a keypad, then waited. Nothing seemed to happen. She typed again. Nothing. Her face grew bewildered. This time, she pressed carefully and deliberately. Waited. Something caught her attention on the screen.
Damn it!
She yelled, smacking the keypad with her palm.
This was the third ATM visit she made on the same day, George said. We all have a digital footprint, Jabbari. We have reconstituted your wife's. We have access to all of her logins and can manipulate her digital data points so that any artificial intelligence trying to authorize her access to secure connections will see her attempts at suspicious activity. The digital footprint we have constructed for her shows that she was recently in Russia just an hour before this trip to the ATM in North Carolina. It flagged that transaction. Thus, her card was confiscated.
George was nonchalant.
You punk, I muttered. Mr. Jabbari, if you want to release this data which we hold hostage, simply meet with Firewater Technologies. Hear Mr. Smith out.
Inspector Oyo continued.
The choice is yours.
He peered out the window.
We're about to land. When we arrive, you can take a car to the Marina Bay Sands Hotel and Casino. Check into a room there. It would be on us. Relax, get some food. Then we will meet with you and George and Firewater.
You got a screw loose, Oyo, if you think I'm going to take a dime from you all.
But you have no ID. You have no phone. How can you maneuver in Singapore without our accommodations?
Singapore's a small place, I responded. I'll make my way okay. What time is this meeting with Harold Smith?
6 p.m. in the casino lounge, table 8, Oyo said.
All right, I'll see you then. They looked at each other, content with my decision. I pulled the newspaper up to my face, ignoring Oyo and George from there on out. I needed to get to the bottom of whatever this was and find a way to help Hidaya and rescue Sophia's digital identity. Several minutes later, The plane touched down on the tarmac of Singapore Changi Airport.
SAFIA Lincoln sat at a windowside booth in a roadside diner near the Coastal Carolina Airport in New Bern, North Carolina. She held her coffee mug in both hands, sipping, but keeping her eyes on the entrance. Many people walked in, but none of them were Agent Dunn. An FBI agent from D.C. would certainly stand out in these parts. She looked at her watch again. She peered through the window blinds into the parking lot. Nothing. 30 minutes passed. She checked her phone to make sure the ringer was on. It was. No missed calls. Time elapsed. 45 minutes. Still no Dunn. But as she got up from the table, he walked in. The FBI special agent, dressing the part with his dark suit and tie, apologized profusely, even though his delay was on purpose. Those 45 minutes gave him time to assess her before their appointment. She was under surveillance, made possible because she had told him exactly where and when to meet. What she thought was a one-on-one coffee meeting, as she had proposed, was an appointment with a full-on surveillance team. 2 of the patrons sitting in booths on opposite sides of her, and another one eating at the counter across from her, were bureau employees. And if Dunn felt it was necessary, the waitress who brought SAFIA her coffee would be interviewed later. SAFIA was perturbed that Dunn was late, but let it slide for the time being. "So, Mrs. Lincoln, I flew all the way down here trusting you," Agent Dunn said. "What was it that you didn't want to discuss on the phone?" "Well, you said you're a bloodhound, right?" SAFIA said. "I wanted to share something for you to track down." "I'm all ears," Dunn said. "I've always had a wall between my work and my husband's work," SAFIA started. "Even though most of my clients work in Intel, patient-client privilege, HIPAA rules and all, I take that very seriously." "As you should," Dunn said, tapping his fingers on the table. "So, while I can't share everything, there's something you should consider," SAFIA said. "Over a year ago, I noticed something in my practice. Some of my patients were under significant amounts of stress. Not the normal stress from everyday job and family pressures, but stress marked by something unique." "What's that?" Dunn asked. "Guilt," SAFIA replied. "The type of guilt that comes when someone is contemplating what they feel is a wrong action. We call it anticipatory guilt. It shows up in their behavior and it influences the questions they ask a therapist. I had never thought about it until recently, but I realized there was a spike in this type of guilt in the months before Jabbari's suspension." "And how is this helpful to me or to your husband?" Dunn asked. "Bloodhound," SAFIA emphasized again. "Look, if I learned anything from watching Jabbari's career from afar, it's that intelligence work is about using all sources. I know whatever you guys do, you're looking at your fancy intelligence collection methods. But I have access to another source of intelligence, my therapy. I learn as much about people and their intentions as I'm sure one of your high-priced undercover informants can gather through being an ear on the wall somewhere. Except in my case, people want to tell me things. I don't have to bribe them or trick them into it." "Mrs. Lincoln, maybe if you could tell me more. Be more explicit," Dunn said. "Well, I am obligated professionally to protect the confidentiality of my clients," SAFIA said. "It's no secret that most of my clients were referred to me through my husband's network of agency friends and family members. I can tell you that, but that's it." She began gathering her things. "Agent Dunn, I'm sorry, but I have to get home for pickup. I wish we had more time, but we started our chat a bit late. I hope this will help you in uncovering the truth, because that's what Jabbari and I are trusting to clear his name. SAFIA stood up to leave and left cash on the table to pay for her drink. Agent Dunn stood up respectfully and they shook hands. SAFIA walked out. The waitress came over with a notepad. She asked if Dunn needed anything. The agent replied that he didn't need anything more. He gathered his belongings and walked out. The other surveillance team members trickled out separately and inconspicuously, feeling like their time had been wasted.
My life seemed to be on a thread, a series of landings, place to place, new situations, new environments, familiar to unknown, and back again. Detroit, MIT, the CIA, Kano, hunted, caught, freed when the plane landed. But with no provisions, I was alone. I held on to the thread, and within a few hours, I had a couple of companions. The two worshippers beamed as they walked with me out, down the steps of the Sultan Masjid, the biggest mosque in Singapore. A city's biggest mosque is always easy to locate. I hadn't caught the names of these guys at that point, but they were soon my new friends. One was gray-haired, and the other was a young man. I assumed they were related. They had lined up on opposite sides of me during the early afternoon prayer. At the prayer's end, after our ritual closing salutations of peace, I shook their hands and sparked a 15-minute discussion when I asked the young one where to find a good meal nearby. From there, everything flowed naturally. Their curiosity was understandable, with me dressed in a fancy suit of African descent but no African accent. Their questioning and their reactions were as expected. I was from America? How did my family become Muslim? What is Ramadan like in the US? I lived in DC? Did I know their relative who lived in San Antonio? They peppered me with questions as we strolled from the mosque gate toward the Padang Cafe right across the street from the mosque. It was an outdoor spot, crowded. A popular place for what I learned was Padang cuisine, food originally from West Sumatra in Indonesia. When we got halfway across the street, the smell of spice, sweet chili, and chicken tickled my nose. I was famished. My new companions held me loosely but enthusiastically by each arm, directing me as if I was blind. "This is where you'll get great Padang food," the older of the two said. He was right. They treated me to a scrumptious lunch. Our talk was small, but strong enough to build bridges. The gray-haired one was named Asim. I told them I had arrived on business but lost my ID and money due to some trouble with criminals in Nigeria. My claim didn't surprise them, and it was factual, if incomplete. "My nephew, Zaki, he will show you around. He is a Grab driver," Asim said, referring to the Southeast Asian version of Uber. "Where do you need to go?" Within minutes after our meal, I was in Zaki's car on the way to the Marina Bay Sands. I rode shotgun, no longer comfortable in the back seat. The entire perimeter of the city-state of Singapore can be traversed in a few hours by car. The scenery in the 11-minute drive to Singapore's landmark casino and hotel spot was the visual yang to Nigeria's yin. More glass than concrete. Different peoples, but both places had their hustle and bustle. Or at least Nigeria did when I had first arrived. I thought about the government buildings. We drove past the Singaporean Ministry of Defense, which I knew little about except that it housed the intelligence agency, the Security Intelligence Division, started in 1966, if my memory served me correctly. I thought about my analyst training days. Singapore, 66. Nigeria, 86. I began to daydream, thinking back to my training, and then my consciousness streamed to the out-of-agency experience for the previous year. Traveler through both the worlds of Nigeria and Singapore, I still longed for home. I longed for SAFIA and my family. Seeing the video of her sparked warmth in my core, but her life had been turned upside down through all of this. All this time I was hung up on my own disappointment, neglecting how much she was in my corner, only leaving my side when I wallowed to the point of unbearability. I missed her and wanted to make it up for her and to our family. Zaki pulled up to the hotel. He handed me a business card and some cash.
When you have time, go and pick up a mobile phone and SIM card. You can text me anytime.
I nodded in appreciation. A hotel concierge opened my door. The Marina Bay Sands Hotel was actually 3 towers, pillars actually, that all supported a huge oval deck overlooking the sea. I entered the middle tower, another world. A sleek maze of high-class allure, money, lights, gold, mirrors. The patrons moved swiftly, crisply, in waves. I parted the lobby crowd. Curious eyes fell on me, but I was dressed for the element, walked as though I belonged, and blended in. I buttoned the first button of my suit jacket, tightened my tie, picked off some lint on my cuff, and found the elevator. It was empty. Inside, I pressed the casino button. Penthouse deck after the 56th floor. Just as the doors were closing, a woman approached. Out of instinct, I stuck out my hand to activate the motion detection.
"Thank you,"
she said. The woman was wearing the clothes of the wealthy. She looked regal, but relatively young, maybe late 20s. Asian, perhaps Singaporean, probably of Chinese descent. The diamond earrings caught my attention, accentuating her black gown with an elaborate green pattern along the neckline. I followed elevator etiquette. I didn't ignore her presence, but I didn't want to start any conversation. She was an unknown quantity. The less we exchanged, the safer for me. But she broke the silence around the 20th floor.
"Are you here on business?"
Her polite tone signaled interest. "Yes, I am," I replied, full stop. A few seconds of silence caused palpable awkwardness, so I added, "And how about you?" She smiled longingly.
"Oh, well, a little bit of business and a little bit of pleasure," she said, using a suggestive tone and little veil. "How long are you here in Singapore?"
"Not long." Full stop again. Thankfully, the elevator reached the casino floor. I walked out first, ungentlemanly passing her by. Her eyes seemed to sting my back. I moved businesslike ahead into the lounge, passing columns of slot machines that lined a pathway to a bar counter. Buzzing, chattering, clanking filled the room. Behind the bar was a towering wall of glass holding back the Singaporean night skyline. A smiling bartender's eyes met mine. Before he could inquire about my desired beverage, I asked for private table 8. He silently pointed across the room 45 degrees to a step-down restaurant area. I followed the ray of his point, past overcrowded blackjack tables and tense poker game clusters. In the restaurant, there were booths separated by wooden screens that offered privacy without obstructing your view of the casino. The other side of the booths overlooked the water. The booths had numbers carved at their edges facing the open area of the lounge. I found table 8. 3 men sat there. 2 I recognized. George and Inspector Oyo nodded at me. The other man was new. He extended his hand.
"Harold Smith, Mr. Lincoln," he said. "Glad to make your acquaintance. Please, have a seat."
Smith was as nondescript as they come, unremarkable in appearance, early 50s, black hair with a little gray, a flushed complexion as if he just finished running a race. He was slim. No, rather skinny. Very skinny. Like a snake. He seemed slippery, but he was polished when he spoke. He seemed too preppy for a corporate registry lawyer. I sat down, ready, on guard, my intellectual antenna already analyzing. Inspector Oyo and George observed me. quietly. I'm only here for two things, I started, staring directly into Smith's eyes. I want my wife's data released, and Hidayah Kermi released unharmed. Whatever your plan is, they shouldn't be caught up in it.
Ah, very bold of you, Mr. Lincoln, Harold Smith shot back. And very expected. But you can make no demands. You see, it's quite fitting we're here in this casino because, well, we're holding all the cards.
Smith looked for me to react. I didn't. Then he poured a bottle of whatever he had been drinking into his glass. He raised it, smirking, and took a swig. After it went down, he did a half grimace as if the drink bit him.
Look around you, Mr. Lincoln. In fact, look behind you across the floor. Do you see the blackjack tables? Do you see the slot machines? Every one of them is occupied, filled with patrons, fixated on their games. Why?
Because people love money, obviously, I replied.
No. I don't think they love the money, Smith said. They love the idea of money. For their problems, it's the idea of a solution, a solvent that dissolves their troubles. They love the idea of what the money will allow them to do. So even when they win, it is difficult to stop the game.
Very philosophical, I said.
Well, you, Jabbari, if I can call you that,
I didn't reply.
You are one to seek solutions. It is the way your brain is wired.
My father used to say there are no solutions, only trade-offs, I shot back.
Yes, said like a true economic historian, your father, Smith followed. Yes, I know about your family background, and I know how much your father influenced you. That you respect how math and money have shaped history. And this is where we share something in common. An understanding that when the way finance works changes, it changes society. From Al-Khwarizmi to Fibonacci to Pacioli, the world has changed, and technology is key to this.
He smiled knowingly. This Harold Smith was pulling out all the stops. He had done his homework, not just on my bio, but on my intellectual interests and the interplay between math and money. Al-Khwarizmi invented algebra by writing an algorithm to translate inheritance guidance from verses in the Quran into practical application for any variable number of heirs or amount of wealth using the decimal system first used by the Hindus. Leonardo Fibonacci, the medieval Italian number theorist, studied mathematics under teachers in North Africa, Syria, Greece, and Sicily, and later made the decimal system more popular in Europe. A few hundred years later, in the Renaissance, Luca Pacioli, an Italian mathematician and Franciscan friar, brought forth a breakthrough method of financial record-keeping. Pacioli codified double-entry bookkeeping, a method where you represent financial transactions as debits and credits on two sides of a ledger. This system had its origin in Jewish bankers in Cairo, but Pacioli formalized it. And because of the revolutionary technology of the printing press, he had wider impact than the mathematicians in previous centuries. It was the printing press that allowed mathematics to be conveyed by symbols. Most people don't realize that before the printing press, people wrote and taught math through words, in prose, because they didn't trust scribes to correctly transmit symbols and complex equations properly. Math, technology, money, and commerce have been interwoven ever since human ancestors carved numbers on bones to count the lunar months.
Well, you see, Mr. Lincoln, Harold Smith continued, money is changing now. Nations want money for the same reason those addicts at the slot machines over there want their chance at winnings, because they think it will allow them to do things. Nigeria is a case in point of what happens when that system is called into question. The naira, even before the collapse, had lost 30% of its value over 5 years. Everywhere this is occurring.
Money is less important now for what it allows you to buy. Information is becoming more important than money, Mr. Lincoln. Data. Do you know that the car industry now plans to make more of its profits through the data it collects on its users than the sale of actual cars? He could have been exaggerating, but he wasn't entirely wrong. I knew from my prized Cadillac. Its system recorded every mile I traveled, every location, my daily routine, my adherence or lack thereof to the speed limit. A waiter brought some seafood to our table. I wasn't hungry. Money is a tool, I said. Just like data is a tool. I use data to stop people like you, Smith. I looked at Oyo and George. And you, I added. So then you should understand clearly, Smith said as he picked up a knife and fork. He quartered a fillet and spoke in between bites. Data gives power. The power to do. Gold used to give power for hundreds of years. For 70 years it has been your US dollar that has given power. But now it is not cash currency, it is data. It's data that has made you sit with us. Your wife's data, no? He paused and chewed. I chewed on his comments. If your plan is to make the long naira displace the dollar as the world's most valuable currency, I'm sorry, Smith, but that's not how the international monetary system works. Coming up with some new digital asset doesn't mean people will want to use it. People want the dollar because of its liquidity. There's a network effect. Because of the dollar's international presence and its role in the global banking system, everybody values it. You can't duplicate that with a newfangled currency. And you can't recreate the power of the American economy, the openness of its market, the stability of its financial system. All of that is why the dollar is the world's global reserve currency. Ah, yes. A stable financial system keeps every country on the same page, Smith countered. Until that financial system is no longer stable. We had a glimpse of it in 2008. When the collapse happened, everyone was looking for an alternative to the US-led financial system, but there was none. No currency could take the lead. Not the euro, not the Japanese yen, nor the Chinese yuan. Every other nation was dependent upon the system of trade and finance of which the dollar is the anchor. But now technology has advanced. There are new mechanisms to conduct international trade. Transactions can happen across borders without going through banks. The long naira isn't the final product. It's a pilot, Mr. Lincoln. A pilot of a data currency. All the world needs to leave the dollar is a sufficient push. Another crisis in the financial system. When SWIFT goes down and international wires can't process transactions, if the banking clearing system in every country cannot rely on the data passing through it, can you imagine? Like unplugging the cord that powers international finance and trade. Can you fathom what a global commercial blackout for just a few days would do to every economy? Yes, the confidence in today's system is wide, Mr. Lincoln, but shallow. It won't take much to uproot it. Smith let a half-smile slip, his nonchalance downplaying his apparent knowledge of the orchestration of some disaster. And well, if the stewards of the financial system were to, lose their standing in the world, why, that would create a global political crisis never before seen. Even so, Smith, why would the world trust what your obscure company and some Nigerian elites prop up as a new instrument for conducting trade? They won't, Smith replied. We know this. But they will trust the Mansa Protocol. It proved its practical use. Lo and behold, it is the default payment method in Nigeria now. But we have seen it sputter after somehow getting introduced in Taiwan. It does not do well in places where money works. But if money fails, it is a suitable replacement. You see, Mr. Lincoln, your crypto experiment was a proof of concept that worked quite organically. I told you I don't own the Mansa protocol. It's a public open source system. Anyone could clone it if they want. Yes, but you have access to the highest share of RZQ tokens, Smith said. As the administrator who deployed the system, we know that you have the private key to the wallet that holds millions of RZQ tokens. Give us the seed phrase to unlock that wallet. We will move the funds to wallets we control, and we remove the mystique worm from your wife's digital footprint. And Hidayah Kurmi will be let free. And if I don't? Well, we know that Miss Kurmi holds the second most amount of RZQ after you. If you don't give up yours, she will no longer be kept from harm. It will be extracted from her by coercive means by those who have mastered the art of coercion. I said nothing, calculating the backability of his threat. This is happening, Jabbari, George said, interrupting my processing. Don't let your ego get in the way. You cannot win. If you do not cooperate, we still get what we want. And you lose. Your wife loses. Hidayah loses. I need proof that you'll follow through. Here's what we'll do. I'll give you 15 of the 16 seed phrases. Give me access to the Mystique Worm program so I can make sure it's deleted. And bring Hidayah to the British High Commission in Abuja and leave her there with their security officer. When you do that, I'll give you the final seed phrase. Harold Smith looked at Oyo and George, first with seriousness, and then they all smiled. What the heck? I blurted. Mr. Lincoln, I would love to play you in chess one day, Smith said. George, make the call and show him. George pulled out his phone and made a video call to a 234 number, the country code for Nigeria. Within seconds, the call connected. I saw Hidayah on the screen. George gave me the phone. Hidayah, are you okay? Where are you? Jabbari, assalamu alaikum, Hidayah said. Thank God you're alive. I am okay. I am in the office of the British High Commissioner. She reversed the camera view into a room with a long mahogany table and massive paintings on the wall. The posh setting was far from the field environment that I saw her on during my flight. I saw that these guys had anticipated my move, at least hours in advance. Jabbari, they just brought me here and dropped me off with this phone. The commissioner is giving me asylum due to the conditions in Nigeria. Hidayah, I need to be sure this is really you. Tell me, what is the joke I said about the Ministry of Agriculture award you received? You said it was an award for ants. It is you, I said, relieved. Hidayah, tell the commissioner everything about what happened to your father and brother, and don't share your private key. Click. George disconnected the call. Okay, Mr. Lincoln, Harold Smith said. You have proof that Miss Kurmi is safe. Now you give us the seed phrases. Do you have a pen and paper? Soon I wrote down 15 words. Give me access to the deletion command for the Mystique virus. George opened up a laptop, quickly typed in some digits, and turned it over to me. I scrolled through and recognized a complex string of instructions for a clearly malicious program. At the bottom, I found a blinking prompt. This deletion cannot be undone. Please enter to confirm program deletion. I pressed enter. The screen flashed. The data disappeared. Then, to Smith, Oyo's, and George's surprise, I got up from the table, walked across the lounge, and asked the bartender for his phone. The trio just watched me. The bartender obliged. Connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, I made a call to SAFIA's number. She quickly picked up. Honey, it's me. I hope to be back to you soon. I know this is very important. Please, just tell me, are you able to log into your bank account? Oh my goodness, Jabbari, how did you? Just trust me. I know this is out of nowhere, but we don't have time. Try to log in now. The line was quiet, and then after a few moments, she got back on. Yes, it's working now. Her words comforted me more than anything I had heard since I left the U.S., because not only was she safe, but it was the first time that I could feel my actions benefiting her instead of endangering her. Wonderful. Stay offline. Babe, from here on out, take out whatever cash you have immediately. I love you. I love you too, Jabbari. I hung up and walked back to the table.
So there you have it, I guess, Smith said. We were prepared to honor our agreement on our side. Now it's your turn. Give us the final seed word.
I jotted down the final word on the paper and gave it to Smith, who gave it to George. Inspector Oyo looked on with anticipation. George typed the word. He smiled. The other two smiled.
Move it to a new wallet,
Smith ordered. George entered more commands.
It is done,
George said. And I turned to Harold Smith. This plan of yours to capture and control everyone's data through this currency, it's doomed to fail. There's something in the way.
And what is that?
Smith asked. Well, the U.S. Constitution, for one. The protection against unreasonable search and seizure, it's baked into the banking system. Your attempt at a global digital surveillance will be dead in the water compared to the current standards for financial privacy. No one would want to touch it. Smith shrugged his shoulders, dismissing my analysis.
I beg to differ. You know, I'd be richer if it weren't for America's influence in the world. Your Constitution has been a hindrance to many people's profiteering, but it's paper, not stone, and paper can be sliced for the right price.
He paused.
It was nice doing business with you, Mr. Lincoln. Enjoy yourself, why don't you? But you might not want to do it here in this building.
The three got up and left. I thought about the plan they divulged. Something was about to happen. If the financial stewards of the world lost their standing, Harold Smith had said. I had a kernel of a thought forming. I went to the bartender and asked, what was up with that big meeting with all the security?
Oh, you mean on the 21st floor?
He said. I really didn't know there was a big meeting with a lot of security, but I thanked him. I moved straight to the elevator and pushed 21. Minutes later, the doors opened. I exited into a massive ballroom filled with black tie and formal gown guests, skin in all the colors of Benetton. They had the look of international delegates but were more bookish. Economists, no doubt. Before I could join the crowd, a tuxedoed security guy asked if I, the only one without a black tie, was lost because this was a private gathering. Before I could answer, I heard from over my shoulder a faintly familiar voice.
Oh, there you are. You're late.
It was the Asian woman from the elevator earlier.
He's in the right place,
she told the security man, who looked me up and down. Then he looked at the woman and acquiesced, waving us toward the rest of the crowd. We moved out of his earshot.
You owe me one,
she said, smiling and placing her hand on my shoulder.
By the way, my name's Jasmine Lau.
She stuck out her hand.
I'm a finance consultant working in Hong Kong. And you?
I shook her hand, but my intel reflexes flexed. Working in Hong Kong, she said. Was she from Hong Kong? From mainland China? Or from the West? She spoke English, but I assumed she wasn't American or British. She said she was a consultant, not a consultant. She probably did not grow up in an English-speaking country, I thought. There was something too personal from this professional. Singapore was full of Chinese government spies. Last thing I needed was to get on the radar of the Chinese intel, aggressive as they were, the MSS, Ministry of State Security. Their modern intel services were formed in, again, I thought back to my intel training class project with Chuck. Before I fell down that rabbit hole, I shook myself out of it and back to the here and now. My spidey sense was tingling again. Thank you, ma'am, I said. I couldn't keep violating the etiquette of pleasantries, but I needed to stay incognito, so I knitted my own thin cover on the spot. I'm a consultant myself, a security consultant, hired to check on things here. 30 seconds in and they already got dinged. That door guy let me in with no badge, off your word alone. That won't look good in my report.
Don't be too hard on the guy, Jasmine said. I've been told I have that effect on men.
She smiled even more suggestively.
They just can't say no.
I tried hard to ignore the flirt. Well, Ms. Lau, I have to run. Have a good night. I turned my head and walked away, mindful of my make-believe security checklist. I waded through the crowd, dispersed in bunches, small-talking over cocktails. For minutes, I moved and scanned, keeping mostly in corners where I could view more scenery. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Then, I noticed many people looking toward one direction, at the entrance. A man walked in with an entourage. I recognized him, the chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve. He stopped in the middle of the room and became the center of a tight-knit circle of delegates. I floated over, close enough to see his lips moving but not to hear him nor to be noticed. Then, I saw Jasmine Lau join his conversation. I was uneasy. She listened intently. I zoomed out, not wanting to put my attention on one person or one thing, lest I miss a bigger picture. I kept scanning, and in my thoughts these blurry jigsaw puzzle pieces started to sharpen, fitting together. The words from Harold Smith, losing their standing. These people, these global financial stewards, were at risk of death, I began to think. Was it a bomb? I scanned again, analyzing the delegates and the hotel staff, local men and women roaming about with trays of hors d'oeuvres and sparkling cocktail glasses. A bombing attack was possible, but this network, this group, didn't seem to favor explosives. There was a bar. I looked above it and noticed a vent. Gas? Poison gas? A nerve agent that would take out everyone in the room? But that seemed clumsy. A server tapped me with a tray of drinks.
Would you care for some bubbly?
The petite woman asked. I looked at her tray, the freshly poured alcohol, and picked up a glass. Squinting, I closely examined the content, the bubbles. I put the glass back. The server tilted her head and rolled her eyes, bewildered. Clarity hit me. Miss, please tell your supervisor to stop all drinks immediately, I told her. I then moved nearer to the circle with the Fed chairman. I did not want to broadcast my concerns and flag my identity, so I whispered to one of the random delegates, a European woman. Please do not panic, but security has concerns about a poison attempt, I whispered. All beverages are to be ceased immediately. They will be making an announcement soon, but please spread the word. Startled, she whispered to a woman next to her. The Fed chairman glanced at me, curious, but he didn't recognize me since I never ever got the chance to brief him. His eyes moved on to the others, but Jasmine Lau scoped me, her gaze locked until someone tapped her shoulder as the telephone game finally reached around the chairman's inner circle of guests. Her eyes widened. Then, as the chairman raised his glass to his lips, Jasmine Lau grabbed his wrist, stopping his drink. Murmurs rose in unison around the room into a buzz. Then, a tap on my shoulder again. It was the same security guy from when I walked in.
Sir, I'm sorry, but I really do need to see your identification.
I patted my blazer jacket chest area with both hands, blinking my eyes as if trying to jog my memory. The man sighed, puffed out his lips, not buying it. He raised his arm, motioning me to the exit. And then, a thud sounded behind me. I turned around. A woman was on the floor. The security man ran towards her. And then, one of the other delegates fell. Then another. Throughout the room, sprinkles of people falling like in a faint. The people who didn't fall leaned over trying to revive the fallen. I walked around the room as the panic spread. Even the chairman was trying to wake a person who had fallen near him. Jasmine Lau was across the room, pacing back and forth, talking on a mobile phone. In a couple of minutes, about half the room was down. And from the frantic looks on the faces of those left standing, those down delegates had not just fainted, they were dead. More people got off the elevator. They were uniformed Singaporean police officers. I knew what would be next. I skeeted straight to the elevator as they shot past me. They spread around the hall. I pushed the elevator button for the lobby. As the doors activated, a man in the hall yelled, "Everyone, this is now a crime scene. No one is allowed to leave." The doors closed and I descended. Moments later, I moved through the lobby into the main doors. Sirens blasted, first distant, then close and loud. A caravan of vehicles sped to the hotel. Singaporean police cars, and also black sedans and SUVs. They parked around the hotel as I walked briskly past. Men of different hues bolted out of the vehicles, undoubtedly security and intel officers from the nations represented by central bankers at the SWIFT meetings. As soon as I turned a corner, the police set up a roadblock behind me. Drivers of stopped cars and pedestrians all locked eyes on the show of forced spectacle surrounding the hotel. I kept moving, no eyes tracking me. I reached into my pants pocket and felt the wad of Singaporean dollars Zaki gave me when he dropped me at the hotel. A convenience store was ahead. I went in for a phone and SIM card. Behind the cashier counter, a TV on an international news channel alerted the viewers to the recent mayhem. A frantic scene in Singapore this evening as the deaths of 30 of the world's central bankers were reported during a cocktail banquet at the SWIFT meetings. Authorities are reporting that they suspect a mass poisoning as the dead appear to have died after consuming drinks at the event, although no traces of poison have been found. I paid with cash, staring at the screen, barely noticing the change the cashier placed on the counter. Then I grabbed it and moved aside as he dealt with another customer. The news showed footage at the front of the hotel and then flashed scenes of the banquet hall, with police tape interlacing the room with lying bodies covered by white sheets. My attention snapped back to the store as the next customer voiced frustration. "Run it again," the man said after the cashier handed him back his debit card. "This card has to work." The cashier inserted the card into the chip reader. The reader flashed the words, "Error 51, insufficient funds." The cashier asked if he had cash. The man said no and walked out frowning. My spidey sense was tingling again. I stayed in the store, and for the next few minutes, I saw the same problem with other customers. Credit cards and mobile payments were declined. Even a person trying to pay with a digital wallet on his watch was turned away. I left the store and noticed two women on the sidewalk, one of them frantically pressing buttons on her phone. "It won't accept my ride request," the one with the phone said. "It keeps saying no funds on my card." The other woman gasped. I strolled past them and studied a stoppage of pedestrians on the sidewalk. More people than normal were standing outside stores, making calls or tapping their screens. Others were storming out of buildings, their faces exuding displeasure that cascaded everywhere I glanced. I sensed a financial spiral of turmoil unfolding, spinning on the streets of Singapore. But as globally connected as this Asian financial center was, I was sure this disaster in progress was not limited to the city-state. Harold Smith's earlier hints of financial chaos had telegraphed something big. And this blockage in digital transactions, if expanded out to the rest of the world, could only be cataclysmic. I inserted the SIM card into the phone I bought and looked at Zaki's business card. I needed to get somewhere quiet and secure to think this through. Singapore was 12 hours ahead of the US, which meant people in the States would just be starting their day now. If payment systems in the US were to grind to a halt like they were doing in Singapore, it would cause not only most commerce to gridlock, but a run on banks, as people would scramble for physical cash. With banks unable to function properly, businesses wouldn't buy and sell. The capital markets would fall. Stock prices would slide, maybe to pennies. The banks would prohibit all withdrawals, only sparking social mayhem. The 2008 crash might be a picnic compared to the collapse that I knew this would cause. I had to see how I could intervene. I knew something about the players involved and their aims, but there I was, shut out of the IC, at a time when my skills were needed the most. I called Zaki and asked for a pickup. He answered that he'd be on his way. I thought about what had happened in that ballroom, all those central bankers who fell, the victims determined only by who was unfortunate enough to drink the mysteriously laced potions, a seemingly untraceable gas that I surmised was connected to the concoction Hedaya was forced to make in her captivity. The way each central banker fell may be just how each nation's economy would soon crash, I thought. Rippling chaos that would turn the world upside down, allowing Harold Smith, Inspector Oyo, George EKOI, and whoever else was behind them to capitalize off the economic carnage. I knew of only one thing that could maybe, just maybe, keep the global economy from the brink of collapse. That was my understanding of the Mansa Protocol. But I had to move fast before those who caused this crisis weaponized my own invention to destroy the world as we knew it.
They said he was done for. They said he was on the run for some crime. They said he committed. They said he did it. They said he was persona non grata. They said he was out yonder, beyond the call of duty. They said it was dishonor. They said it was to avoid the trauma. They said that the best in their midst was a glitch, gorilla unglued. They said a switch fell through the cracks, so they pulled it. They said it was the facts. They said it was the check that bounced back. They said it was time. He said it was a line. They said it was crosswords. They said the crossroads were fine. He said the railroads make tracks on his back. He raised up out of dodge his spine. They said he was in the wind. They said it was a cloud. They said the alibi was thin. They said pay him no mind. They said it's a chess game and the one with the most pawns wins. They said it was checkmate. They said it was ixnay. They said it was clean. He said it was a scheme. He said it was murder. They said it was suicide, open shut case. They said it was like P-Rock. They said it was hard knocks. He said it was all talk. They said the letters of covert in action, but he read CYA. They said it was no play. He said no kidding. The earth was spinning and he wound up back on stage. They said it was intermission. He said it was a third act. He said it's a new mission. He said the play writes itself in intelligence. The spy game is aimed on attrition. Tunnel vision. He said he was thinking the locomotive light was blinking.
The Jabbari Lincoln Files, Season 1, The Mansa Protocol. The Jabbari Lincoln Files is a Sine Curve Studios production. Story written and narrated by Yahya Jatta Fanusi, who also produced the sound design. The Deputy Chief of Ops is narrated by Farida Abdul Tawab Brown. The Jabbari Lincoln cover art designed by Marilyn Wu and Jasmine Manning. Sine Curve Studios would like to thank the following for constructive story feedback: Chandra Caldwell, Ross Tierney, James Brown, Farida Abdul Tawab Brown, Justin Vitfeld Matthews, Andrea Usain, Jamila Kaleri, Tam Hussein, Faisal Abdur Rahman, Imam Salim Mutman, the Babatunde Bays. For story writing consultation, Cameron Pasha, Sahir Vora. For banking and crypto consultation, Linda Jang. For media strategy, stylist Akira's The Annie Agency, Scott Guerrero and Kathleen Chen. Intellectual property consultation by PatentInsider.co. Morale support through thick and thin, Dr. Fatima. Watch for a new episode next Thursday and visit Jabbari Lincoln's blog at jabbarilincoln.com. Peace.